Hi everyone, and welcome back to Lemon Dew. I'm Bari, and in today's episode, I'm going to be talking about my experience of being an autistic person who is, of course, working in a full-time job. So obviously, with the episodes concerning autism and work, these are going to be broken down into two parts. So part one, which is today's episode, is where I talk about all the jobs as well as work experience placements that I've held down and some of the positives and negatives of being an autistic person who is currently employed. And then part two, which will be released in the next 2 weeks, to be more specific, on the 19th of May, talks about some of the issues that autistic people face when it comes to finding a job as well as keeping a job. To be honest, I have found the topic of autism and work quite interesting, especially because I have been doing a bit of research into it and I've managed to find experiences from other people's perspectives, mostly on sites like Reddit. And I think it's very interesting to read other people's experiences because I know that I'm not alone when it comes to navigating my way through the workforce. Now, I guess coming from personal experience as an autistic person, I suppose I'm one of the lucky few who is actually in some form of consistent employment, especially because I've never really had experiences where my autistic traits have made me get fired from jobs or I guess let go from jobs in a sense. But then again, one of the most concerning things when it comes to autism and employment is the fact that more than 50% of autistic people are actually underemployed or sadly unemployed. Now, of course, I am going to be talking more about this in the next part of the topic of autism at work, but I guess what I'm trying to say here is that it is really sad knowing how lots of autistic people do find it difficult to get into jobs. And I suppose it's because a lot of employers don't really provide enough accommodations, either because they would save money or simply because they can come across very discriminatory. And coming from former experience as somebody that used to do recruitment, it's very hard to sort of identify what kind of accommodations autistic people need, especially if they don't disclose. But then again, I'm going to be saving more information on this for the second part of autism and work. So now that I'm pretty much ready, I'm going to start off with talking about where I'm at now in terms of employment, as well as the previous jobs that I've held down and the little bits of work experience that I've done. Although in the case of work experience, I'm not really going to delve too much into detail just because most of the work experience I've done in the past was actually temporary work experience. So I'm mostly going to be talking more about paid employment that I've done from university to this present day. But of course, the work experience parts will come here and there. So in terms of where I'm at now, I am actually doing a full-time job for a local council. So of course, for my personal reasons, I'm not really going to mention where specifically I work, but the type of job I'm doing right now is actually a receptionist role. So I'm basically a main receptionist for a local council and I do 36 hours a week. So basically in terms of my job, because it is a fixed reception role, I am in that specific area Monday to Friday for just over 7 hours a day. Now, what's really funny is the fact that I am working in an office-based environment. And of course, for a lot of autistic people, working in an office can be very unsettling, mainly because the environment has fluorescent lighting. You have open plan offices where people can sort of go into your space. You might have hot desking where you're not really fixed to a certain desk. You might have noise in the background as you're trying to concentrate on your work. You have to complete a range of tasks. You have to take phone calls. So depending on the person, because every autistic person does have different needs, of course, they may or may not be able to cope with that type of environment. But I suppose for myself, although the social aspect of working in an office is exhausting, as I'm honestly not a people person, there is that part of me that is actually used to it. And I suppose this is because prior to my current job, I used to work in an open plan office for a care provider / recruitment agency for 2.5 years. And that was actually the longest amount of time I've held down a job for. So, most of the jobs that I've done so far in my 5 years of working life, that is in terms of paid employment, have lasted for over a year. So the first job that I actually did was when I was 19. So from November 2018, when I was a second year university student in the middle of my illustration course, I used to do temp work. So I was working as an admin temp / student panelist. So most of the jobs that I would pick up were odd temp jobs during my independent study sessions, as I used to have classes for less than 5 days a week. So I would mostly be assisting with recruitment processes as part of a student panel. So basically, you would have a series of candidates coming in and producing a presentation. So they were sort of demonstrating a class for half an hour each to us, as in the student panel. So as part of the student panel, my job mostly involved assessing the candidate's ability to deliver lecture content, as well as the way they would engage with students, and of course, their knowledge of the taught subject. So a lot of the candidates that would come in to apply for roles within my university were mostly applying for illustration-based roles, if that makes sense. So basically, they would apply as tutors within that specific field, and as part of the student panel, I had to see which candidate was best suited for the role they were applying for. And I guess looking back at my experience of doing temping, there wasn't really anything bad I could say about it, because that was actually the first job I did when I was a uni student. So prior to university, I never really worked in paid employment. I was mostly doing a bit of work experience in secondary school as a teaching assistant. And then I also did some work experience during my college years where I was a designer for my college. So I was basically making bin designs. And from personal experience, at least when it came to the work experience I did in secondary school and such, to be honest, I didn't really like working as a teaching assistant. I mean, the only reason I did that job as a form of work experience for a week when I was in year 10 at secondary school was because I couldn't really find anything in the arts, and that was kind of the only job I could find at such short notice. And I guess the reason I didn't like it is because I had to be around children, and I'm not really a people person. I don't really see myself doing teaching because I'm not really someone that likes kids and likes being around them for long periods of time because they're full of energy. And I guess when you're around people that are just bursting with energy, it gets very exhausting after a certain period of time and you just feel really fatigued. So that was kind of why I did not like that kind of work experience, and just sort of having to plan lessons on a regular basis and such. It was just really stressful. And I suppose the main thing I learned from my time doing work experience as a teaching assistant in year 10 was that childcare is not really a career that I ever want to go into. I just don't really want to do any kind of job that involves working with children. Now, back to my university years in terms of my work experience, it was actually quite decent, you know. It was a good way for me to get something on my CV, and that's something I'm grateful for, because even though I mostly regretted going to university due to the course not really having enough content that helped me prepare for the illustration industry, I was always grateful to have the opportunity to do work experience because I could earn my own cash and I was able to have something to put on my CV, because one of the things that I really wanted to do as a university student was to make sure I had something to put on my CV, because at least when I graduated from my course, I had some credible work experience which would count towards something. Because the problem with transitioning from university into the workforce is that if you don't have a lot of work experience, it can be very difficult to find a job as a graduate, because you're competing against other people who will have at least 5 years of work experience on you. So I was always grateful to have that work experience on my CV. Now, in terms of my previous job, that is prior to my current job that I'm doing with a local council, I was working as an admin assistant for a care provider / recruitment agency, which I mentioned before. And I was doing that job from March 2021 to September 2023 last year, which was the month I left the job. And initially, when I was doing this job, I was actually supposed to be a healthcare assistant in a care home. So because I graduated in July 2020 during the pandemic, I was having some issues with finding a job in the illustration industry, because there wasn't really much that was going on in terms of finding a job in that industry. So I was trying to see if I could find something, but it was very difficult because a lot of jobs wanted somebody with more experience than a graduate. And because of the circumstances with the pandemic, I had to just sort of take any old job. And unfortunately, I was in a position where I had to go on benefits for a couple of months. And even though I had a work coach who was actually very supportive and was aware of my needs and my autism and such, being on benefits was a very depressing experience, because in the UK, if you are on a form of government assistance, people look down on you a lot. So you're classed as a scrounger, you're classed as somebody who is leeching off the state, and it's very difficult to sort of tell people that you're having financial difficulties, because there's that automatic judgment that will just come your way. Now, in terms of the job that I did get, which was an admin assistant role, it actually changed to that. So as I mentioned before, I was actually supposed to work as a healthcare assistant in my previous role, but because there weren't enough shifts for me on the rota, long story short, I ended up working as a admin assistant. So going into my previous job, there was only one permanent admin, which was one of my senior colleagues who was an HR admin. So the previous admin that came before me left after a couple of months because they found another job at their university. So I ended up being put in the main office because I did have some level of admin experience from university and recruitment experience, as I used to do recruitment. And even though I picked up things really quickly, I think my main frustrations with my previous job was the fact that I was taking on so much. And the thing with working in an office for me is, even though I am good at that type of job, it's not really something I intend to do forever. And I think it's because office environments after some period of time can be really exhausting, because like I said, you have so many things going on around you. And I think that was kind of what made me feel stressed and fatigued, because I was doing the work of 3 people for a very low wage. So aside from my primary duties in terms of recruitment, onboarding and compliance, I had to manage cloud doc policies, I had to recruit for external roles, I was even training staff, even though at one point I had less than a year of experience in this job. I was also having to do a rota for one of the care homes at one point, scrambling around to find cover because things were changing last minute. I had to take a lot of phone calls, deal with emails, and there were days where I would be doing so much, I would forget to have breaks. And with my former managers, to put it lightly, there was kind of an issue if you took breaks over an hourly period. So basically, after each hour of work, I started to take breaks away from the computer, because if I am working in an office and I'm sitting on a desk for too long, I get fatigued really easily, and it gets to a point where I zone out, and it doesn't help because my concentration just reduces. So my former managers kind of had an issue with me taking regular breaks away from the computer, because I was in a position where I wasn't near the office and they wanted somebody to be able to take phone calls, and that didn't really help. And another thing I noticed as well is when I was taking on a lot of work at once, I would just get so stressed. And funnily enough, when I was talking to a former colleague who did show some signs of ADHD, there was something they said that actually kind of resonated with me. So basically, when they take on too much tasks, they have to have a body double. And a body double is basically where you have another person that's present so that the stress is taken away when you're handling a lot of tasks. And even though I don't have ADHD, I kind of understand what they meant, because sometimes there were days where I would be taking on so much work and I would have to have a body double present so that the stress and the workload that I was dealing with on my own would be eased off me. And having something like that helps, because I know that I can just deal with one thing at a time. Because when I'm working in an office, and I'm not really sure if this applies to every autistic person, because again, everyone who is on the spectrum has different needs. But for me personally, when I'm working in an office, I have to do things one step at a time, because I also have a bit of a perfectionist mentality where I like to produce good quality work. So if I'm producing something that is half-assed, I don't feel happy, because I'm just thinking to myself, I don't like the way my work looks. I think this just looks like absolute shit. And when I'm producing work, I have to figure out what needs to be done each day. So usually what helps is having a list of things according to priorities, because if, say, for example, there's a project I'm working on and there's a specific deadline that's near, I can deal with that first. But sometimes, even though I'm capable of multitasking, if I'm doing too many things at once, it can be very difficult to focus on my main task, because then I tend to forget where I'm at. And another thing as well is when I am working, I've noticed how my demeanor and my voice changes around people. So as I've probably mentioned in a past episode, I have only just realized that for most of my life, I have been masking my autistic traits and social awkwardness. So usually when I'm at work, I have what is called a customer service mask, which is where I present myself in a more professional manner and my tone is more professional. So if, for example, I am taking a phone call, my voice would kind of sound a bit like this. Good morning, this is Brie from XYZ Company. How may I help you today? So it's like over the years, my voice just automatically knows when to switch to that customer service mask. So whether I'm talking to a colleague in person, whether I'm taking phone calls, as I mentioned, that customer service mask is really helpful, because I know how to react, if that makes sense. And in a way, masking is one of the main things that helps me survive a work day, especially because I am trying my best to conceal my social awkwardness and certain autistic traits, like my inability to identify social cues. And masking also applies to job interviews, because when I've taken job interviews in person, I get nervous so easily. So usually when I prepare for an interview, I write notes of the things I want to ask or say, because sometimes my brain just forgets. So when I was doing my recent job interview for the current job that I'm in now, I remember I was talking so fast, and one of the interviewers had to tell me to slow down. And I had to explain that I got really nervous, because when you have one person looking at you, that's one thing. But when you have a whole panel of interviewers looking at you, you just get so afraid of messing up. And I think that's what's really concerning for me, is that I don't like having so many eyes focused on me, because I have this sort of feeling inside where I think somebody is anticipating me screwing up, or anticipating myself saying the wrong thing in an interview. And then there's also those instances where certain questions just throw me off. So if I'm asked a star question, I'm just thinking to myself whether I have to be honest or lie, because in a lot of job interviews, it's kind of like you have to exaggerate certain things, which is something I don't like doing, because I would consider myself to be an honest person. So lying can be a bit difficult, especially when I don't know what words to say, if that makes sense. But even though masking has helped me survive in jobs, it's very exhausting, because I feel like an actress where I'm pretending to be something I'm not. And it kind of gets to a point where I have to decompress after each day, because if I don't decompress, I just get so stressed, and then I feel that I cannot be myself. So sometimes when I'm at work, it's like there's that part of me that feels fake, because I am adapting the customer service mask to survive each day. Now, when it comes to doing my actual job, I think I'm better with admin tasks in terms of anything to do with technology, because as I said before, I do learn things fairly quickly, especially when it comes to computers and software, because I do remember in my old job, I used to help my colleagues with anything IT related, because I was kind of like that go-to person that knew certain things in regards to operating the Windows system. So, anything to do with computers, I'm very good at learning and adapting so quickly. And I would say when it comes to messaging colleagues over MS Teams, or talking to them on a phone, or writing emails, it's easy for me to do that because I don't have to make eye contact. But I would say with messages and emails, identifying certain tones and nuance is a little bit difficult, because it's hard to tell if somebody's happy with you, if someone's frustrated with you, that kind of thing. And I would say, in comparison to my previous admin job, my current job doesn't really involve taking a lot of phone calls, which is honestly a good thing, because sometimes I hate taking loads of phone calls, especially when people ask me questions that I don't know the answers to, because there's those times where I do feel really stupid and I'm second guessing myself, because I do sometimes have low self-esteem, and sometimes I'm wondering if the current job I'm doing is even right for me, because there's those instances where I have this voice just sort of questioning if what I'm doing is the right thing. And I would definitely say as well, in regards to small talk and things like that, if people are talking to me for so long, I do tend to zone out and I forget what's happening. So it's like my mind is somewhere else and then my body is at work. So it's almost as if my soul is separating. And then if people do give me eye contact as well, I do have to sort of flitter my eyes towards another area in order to avoid the person looking at me, because again, eye contact makes me really, really nervous, you know. But I would say, in terms of being an autistic person, sometimes the autism has advantages because, you know, one thing I would say that's very useful is having a good memory. So like in the job that I work in, if I'm greeting young people, I don't even have to look at the spreadsheet or the calendar to see who they're there for, because once I'm used to people's faces and things like that, I just know exactly why they're in the building. And it was the same thing where I used to work, is when staff would come in for things, I would just know who they were just by looking at their face, because it's like I log in things in my head. So sometimes I feel like I have a whole filing cabinet inside my brain and I'm just picking it apart and just figuring out what is happening, and things just click for me. And, you know, using software as well, because like I said, I'm very good with technology, so I'm very quick at learning how to use new software, because, you know, even in my current job, there's loads of new software that I've managed to learn how to use very quickly, like the Mosaic and YJ systems, and also the room booking calendar. That's very easy. It's like a piece of piss for me, because again, I used to do like appointment bookings and things in Outlook calendar, because I created a whole system in my previous job, as I never really had one. But I think the point is the autism comes in handy with that. But then again, there are instances where certain jobs, mainly my previous job, had this whole trial and error mentality where management wouldn't really train you. So I had to sort of guess the right methods to apply when working in my job, especially if my senior wasn't present. And that's not really a good thing, because when you're new to a job, you don't want to be thrown to the wolves. And I guess with the way I am as well, I don't really like seeing new people, especially those with neurodivergence, being thrown to the wolves in a new job, because I'm one of those people that wants to try and train somebody as much as I can so I can help the person, because I know how it feels to be new to a job, and I just don't like seeing people, you know, being left out and stuff like that. But I think that's kind of my mentality. So yeah, but anyway, this is pretty much all of the main things that I wanted to cover for part 1 of autism and work. So like I said, part 2, which is going to be released on the 19th of May, is where I talk about the issues concerning autism at work, more specifically to do with what it's like to have to apply for jobs, let alone keep jobs. And this is really interesting because I have a lot of material for this particular episode that I want to discuss. So as always, I want to thank you all for supporting my podcast. And as of this week, of course, the 2-week release schedule is going to be consistent. So every 2 weeks, I'll be releasing new episodes. I hope you guys all have a good day, and I hope you enjoy your long weekend, because there's going to be a bank holiday. Thank you, and goodbye for now.